Benjamin Sinclair Johnson will be remembered by most as the Canadian sprinter who tested positive for steroids in a career that had many highs before his athletics journey came to an abrupt end after the 1988 Olympics game in South Korea. This is the story of Ben Johnson. Johnson was born on December 30th, 1961 in Falmouth, Jamaica, the capital city of the Caribbean country's Trelawney Parish. The city itself is situated near a cruise ship port that lies between Oca Rios and Montego Bay on the island's north shore. His family and neighbourhood generally identified as modest, working-class people, and so young Benjamin was always reaching for higher goals and a better life for himself from an early age. It wasn't easy for the young boy. His mother Gloria left the family to Canada when he was just 10 years old. This domestic upheaval resulted in Ben developing a stutter, to which he received many taunts and bullying from his classmates at school. Eventually in 1976, 5 years after Gloria left, Johnson would follow his mother to the large, multicultural region of Scarborough, Ontario, a Toronto-based suburb, which is surrounded by enormous cliffs that sit atop Lake Ontario, as well as numerous parks, beaches, and hiking trails. He would still encounter insults and provocation for his speech impediment from those at his school. Johnson, however, hardened by his unstable childhood, had enough confidence to challenge those who made fun of him, to race at the local tracks. The teasing quickly ceased as Johnson's strength and speed spoke for itself, thus providing him a source of comfort and personal vocation in his life that would ultimately lead him to his coach and mentor, Charlie Francis. After meeting Francis, and with an abundance of ambition, potential, and newfound determination in both his mind and body, Johnson decided to pursue the life of a competitive sprinter. He joined the Scarborough Optimistics Track and Field Club, where he trained at York University, Canada's third largest campus, alongside his new coach, with the intention of accumulating as many medals as possible. Francis himself was a former Canadian 100-metre sprint champion in 1970, 1971 and 1973, as well as a member of the Canadian national team for the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich. He would also become the sprint coach for the national team for a little over 9 years. It was fair to say that the confident yet impressionable Johnson was in good hands with Francis. Or was he? Johnson wasted no time in achieving his first major and international medals, winning 2 silvers at the 1982 Commonwealth Games in Brisbane, Australia. From there, as well as accumulating numerous consistent medals at indoor and outdoor championships, Johnson would represent his adoptive country at the 1984 Summer Olympics, which were held in Los Angeles. During the final of 100 metres, he would suffer a false start, whereby an athlete moves within 0.1 seconds after the gun is fired, and had to accept the third-place bronze medal behind fellow sprinter and long jumper Carl Lewis. The American would become a major adversary throughout Johnson's career. Another bronze medal came in the 4x100 metre relay alongside team members Tony Sharp, Desai Williams and Sterling Hines. Things were looking good for the young man, topping the charts in many domestic races as well as opinions, lists and rankings, and capping it off by smashing the Canadian record in August 1984 in Zurich. The following year would be a mixed bag, losing to Carl Lewis a total of 8 times, before finally overcoming his rival for the first time in Switzerland, by 1/100th of a second. Johnson would go on to better his combatant in the 1986 Goodwill Games, continuing his trajectory as one of the best sprinters in the world, with another win at the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh. At this point, there was talk of performance-enhancing drugs playing a part in the sport, with fellow Canadian sprinter Mike Dewar stating that the use of such drugs was reaching epidemic proportions, especially from those who trained in the big cities and provinces of Toronto and Ontario. For Johnson, the medals, attention and domination of the sport would continue, with the Jamaican-born superstar's finances reaching $500,000 per month in endorsements, as well as being named Athlete of the Year in 1987 by the Associated Press of America. In April of the same year, Johnson would be awarded the prestigious honour of becoming a member of the Order of Canada, which recognises people across all sectors of society who have made extraordinary and sustained contributions to the Commonwealth nation. At the height of his popularity and success, Ben Johnson was unstoppable, beating Carl Lewis on a regular basis and becoming the fastest 100-meter sprinter in the world, a title which he held over the course of the 1987 and 88 season. However, on the 24th of September 1988, things would change dramatically for Johnson and his coaching team, resulting in a massive scandal and leaving his career in ruins. The Seoul 1988 Olympic Games took place between September 17th and October 2nd, and was the tournament's 21st version of the modern Olympics. Unfortunately, the build-up was marred by student riots, which took the shine off the grand opening. Another issue from the outset was the boycotting of countries who had decided to support North Korea's avoidance of the Games. Cuba and Ethiopia backed their fellow communist nation to co-host the event, but pulled out after they were refused. Despite this initial turmoil, the Games commenced as planned, with nearly 8,500 athletes from 159 countries participating in the multitude of events, including the return of tennis and inclusion of archery and table tennis into the schedule. On September 24th, Ben Johnson took to the track alongside world record holder Calvin Smith, Linford Christie, and once again his nemesis Carl Lewis for the 100-meter final. Little did any of them know just how controversial the race would become. The race itself was nothing out of the ordinary, even though a world record was broken. As they set from the blocks, Johnson burst forward and into the lead, holding onto the position until crossing the finish line at a time of 9.79 seconds. Lewis, on the other hand, seemed far too concerned with his rival's perfect sprint that he merged slightly out of his own lane. The competitiveness between the two visibly etched across his face as he watched Johnson raise his arms in victory. And so, after a handshake between both runners, the race was complete with the best man taking the glory. The next morning, Johnson woke up to the news that he had in fact failed a drug test that was analysed from a urine sample in the lead up to the 100-meter race. Traces of the banned androgen and anabolic steroid stanozolol were found, prompting members of the International Olympic Committee to confront the Canadian at his hotel, where his mother watched on in disappointment and sadness. The drug itself, as you would imagine, is a booster for testosterone levels in athletes, and is taken in order to ameliorate physical appearance and performance. For Johnson, his name would, from that moment on, be attributed to the drug. He handed the gold medal back to the IOC and would later be disqualified for doping offences and stripped of his medals that were accumulated whilst on the stimulant, some of which dating back to 1981. The only extenuate that would take some of the spotlight off Johnson was the fact that Linford Christie also failed drug tests that day, along with a few other participants. And so, as the Scottish journalist Richard Moore named, in his 2012 book, the events would be declared and remembered as the dirtiest race in history. Moore, who passed away in March 2022, also competed as a sportsman, representing Great Britain at the Tour of Langkawi and Scotland, at the Preux Tour in cycle racing. He also took part in the 1998 Commonwealth Games, before turning his skills to journalism. He states in his book that there was a huge problem with the fight against drugs, and that, then head of the IOC, Juan Antonio Samaranch, couldn't care one way or the other. He was ambivalent on the whole subject. When discussing the scandal of Ben Johnson, Moore points to the actions of his coach and to his doctor, George Mario Astafan, also known as Jamie. Astafan practiced medicine in various places across Canada, including Ontario and Toronto, and was the sole practitioner found guilty of providing stanozolol to Johnson, with the consent of Francis. Despite rejecting the charges against him for 18 years, he was banned for practicing medicine for 18 months in Canada, but would continue to hit the headlines after being charged with conspiracy to contribute cocaine in 1994, a crime he would serve 2 years in prison for. Charlie Francis was candid about the course of steroids that he set out for Johnson back in 1981, claiming that it was necessary to be able to compete and maintain levels in a sport that he believed to be riddled with substance abuse amongst his athletes. In his book Speed Trap, Francis stated that you only cheat if no one else was doing it. I was aware of what other people were doing in the field. I just did it better than anyone else. It doesn't make you a fast runner. It was my training regime that was better than the rest of the world. Johnson also went on the attack, stating that his case was not handled well from the offset, and that racism was prevalent in the decision-making process by the IOC. Stating, "They didn't give me the benefit of the doubt. They didn't protect me. If this was any other country in the world, the government would have come in and protected the athletes." With Johnson, Francis, Lewis and Astafan all in the spotlight, and with the controversy surrounding the worrying figures relating to athletes and performance-enhancing drugs, an official inquiry was put together by the government to address each and every issue, known as the Dubin Inquiry. After being chaired by Ontario Court of Appeal Chief Justice Charles Dubin, the meeting was conducted the year after the Games in Seoul, with the report being released in June 1990. Astonishingly, Johnson continued to deny using steroids, despite the overwhelming evidence and testimonies against him. However, he would eventually admit to cheating after the honest admissions from his longtime coach. Dubin's report declared the situation as a moral crisis, concluding that the failure of many sport governing bodies to treat the problem more seriously and to take more effective means to detect and deter the use of such drugs has contributed in large measure to the extensive use of drugs in athletes. Richard Moore's observation of the incident and subsequent handling of the situation was also full of criticism. However, he would go on to condemn the government's long-term management of the issue, stating, "Absolutely nothing changed after 1988. It would be, after all, a full 12 years before the World Anti-Doping Agency would be formed." What was the reason for the wait? As with every fall from grace, there are two sides to every story. For Johnson, the finger-pointing was for a time aimed directly at his American rival and entourage. After the embarrassment, criticism, and awarding of the gold medal to Lewis retrospectively, due to his disqualification, Johnson claimed that Lewis's team had deliberately sabotaged his drug sample at the 1988 Games. He told Melbourne's Herald Sun newspaper in a December 1st interview that he met with a former American football player and close friend of Lewis for a beer before taking his urine test. He claims that during the meeting, someone, perhaps the footballer himself, had spiked his drink with steroids. When asked about Lewis's direct connection to the apparent mischief, he replied, "I won't say too much, but he's involved." Needless to say, the accusations were quickly shot down and contested by Lewis's manager, Joe Douglas, in a follow-up interview with the Australian weekly tabloid, where he categorically stated that Carl had absolutely nothing to do with Ben testing positive. Douglas was founder of the Santa Monica Track Club, an association known for producing highly talented athletes for major international events. The club's competitors have won more than 27 Olympic medals, including 19 gold as well as 18 world championships, smashing numerous domestic and world records. So naturally, Douglas wanted to ensure the integrity of his business as well as the innocence of his athletes. Lewis would also publicly state his position on Johnson's steroid use during a television interview by announcing that a lot of people have come out of nowhere and are running unbelievably, and I just don't think they're doing it without drugs. The rivalry, one-upmanship, and sheer hatred the men had for each other almost came to blows when both Johnson and Lewis squared up to one another and began to brawl. Luckily, Mal Latney, another former American sprinter, was on hand to separate the two. If history has taught us anything, the only thing better than a fall from grace is a fully loaded comeback. Unfortunately for Ben Johnson, this was not the case. After the dust had settled on his career and the rivalry with Lewis had simmered down, Johnson attempted to make a brief comeback to athletics. However, another failed drug test in 1993 resulted in a ban for life for the Canadian. Over the next few years, he would take various jobs and offer his services to those willing to be trained by him. At one point, he was employed as a personal trainer for Sadi Gaddafi, the son of former Libyan ruler Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, who had aspirations of becoming a professional soccer player. In August 2008, Johnson was the one to file a case against an institution he lodged a $37 million lawsuit against the estate of his former lawyer, Ed Futerman. The reason for his acquisition was that the attorney had made payments from his trust fund to pay off numerous bills, as well as 20% commissions to a hairdresser that Futerman had employed to act as the Sprinter's sports agent. Johnson claimed that he, nor his closest team members, had knowledge of these transactions and did not authorise them. The case, however, would be dismissed in 2012 by the Ontario Superior Court, who concluded that there was no genuine issues raised requiring a trial. After launching a clothing and sports supplement line in 2005, a venture that would later fail, Johnson took to coaching young soccer teams at the Genova International School of Soccer, as well as other mentoring appointments. In 2010, he released a self-published autobiography called Soul to Soul, where he discussed his humbling upbringing in Jamaica, as well as his sprinting career and health issues. Johnson currently resides in the city of Markham in Ontario with his family. We live in a world where bigger is considered to be better, whether it be one's physical, bank account, house, car, or ego. The thirst and demand for glory is even greater when it comes to athletic endeavour. The global competition is something that would strike fear into the majority of young, aspiring competitors, so it's easy to see where the lure and persuasion from coaches to take performance-enhancing drugs comes into play. For Ben Johnson, the struggle to become the fastest man on the planet came at an almighty cost. A cost that, as you will see in our future sports videos, many sports competitors are willing to take. We hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.